Hi, I'm Tom Ryle from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and today I want to welcome you into my garage where I'm going to finish processing my black-tailed deer. All right, with our front and hind quarters broken down, the next step is to start trimming meat. What I've got here is 4 cuts of meat off the front and hind quarters that are going to pretty well represent everything you're going to run into while you're breaking down a big game animal. So we're going to trim up a eye of the round roast, we're going to trim up this top round, a blade roast, and I'll show you how I handle the shanks. We'll do these one by one, and I'll give you a lot more detail as we go. Alright, we've got a shank here, and I'm going to show you the steps that I take to get this prepped for slow cooking in a crock pot. So all we've done is removed this lower leg from the rest of the quarter. The first thing I do, again, is I use my paper towels. They stick to this outer fascia really well. And so what you can do is use the paper towel to get a good grip. And I like to pull off this outer layer. And it really comes off quite simply. Just again using the tip of the knife, pulling and laying the knife down in that seam. And you don't have to get all of it off. I just like to get the bulk of this outer fascia off because oftentimes dirt and debris will be stuck to that in the process of getting your animal out of the field. Now, all of this remaining thin tissue and the connective tissue inside the thin silver skin, it will all completely render out in the cooking process. Basically brings moisture into the cook itself, so you don't need to, again, separate all of this. Now the other thing I'll do is when you remove this leg portion, there's kind of the kneecap area, you can just get in here with your knife and trim up some of this on the joint end just to make it cleaner and to remove some of the cartilage and other tissue there. Okay, so that's pretty well cleaned up. Now what I do is I prep this bone for cutting it off. I use a standard hacksaw with a new blade in it. I typically just wash this in soap and water, and I usually rinse it in boiling water just to be sure there's no manufacturing oils or anything on that because it's not a food grade blade. So to prep the shank, and this is the same for both front and rear shanks, I usually come right up to where the meat turns into this tendon material, and I'll make a cut around the shank, and then I like to just carve this back away from the meat. Some people like this presentation. I think it's kind of a French culinary technique where you leave a portion of the bone exposed, but because I'm trying to fit this in a crock pot, I prefer to just cut it off. So once I have this meat removed away from the shank itself, the meat, then I typically come in on the edge of my bench surface, firmly grip the shank, and then make your cut. And you can just start sawing through the bone. You don't even have to go all the way through. And then what I do is I'll take my paper towel and I'll be really careful to clean all of those bone fragments and whatnot off of the end of that shank. And then I'm going to come in and do one more little trim cut. And there you have it. So you have 2 wonderful shanks ready to go right in the crock pot. And again, a little bit of broth. You can use vegetable broth, bone broth, beef, chicken, whatever you want. Maybe a cup and a half potatoes, onions, carrots, some celery, a little bit of rosemary, 8 hours. This will be one of the best meals you've eaten. So there we go with our shanks. So now looking at our top round, this is, as I mentioned, a beautiful piece of meat. You will see lots of fat attached to the meat. And the one thing about wild game versus beef, for example, is that you won't find marbled meat with game meat. So if you cut through this, it's just going to be solid red meat. Whereas on a beef, you have that marbling, and that is what gives beef its, first of all, the fat tastes really wonderful. It adds a lot of flavor and juiciness to the meat. Wild game does not have that benefit. So you want to remove all this fat. And the nice thing about that is it's not marbled inside the meat. So if you're taking your deer apart, some deer in the fall have a big layer of fat, some don't. Most of the time it's going to look like this, where you've got just nodules of fat in various places layered between muscle groups, etc. So you're going to want to trim all that off. So I'm going to start by simply doing that. And this is a bit of a tedious process, but again, a really sharp knife is going to make this very quick and fast. Whereas if you're struggling and you're fumbling around trying to make simple, small little cuts, it's going to be a much longer process for you. Any of the silver skin like this, because I will be grinding this, but I'm going to treat this if I was not going to be grinding it. So I'm going to want to remove that. I don't want that on my steak or my roast. I would say that if you are going to make a roast, you have a little bit more leeway there, because in a roast, some of this will cook off. It will not be problematic. But on a steak, I don't want that, so I use the tip of my knife and just simply remove it. And then, as I mentioned, I'll probably mention again, since this video is pretty unscripted, I like to use paper towel, because a paper towel helps me find the loose pieces of fascia, and it sticks to them. It sticks very well, so you're able to have a little bit more control when you're removing that. Basically, all I'm going to do is go through here, and the knife's already getting dull. I'm just going to go through here and remove as much of this as possible, and I'm going to do it with as little waste as possible. So if you use that as your kind of your guiding approach to this, that's going to get you the best results. Again, any trim that kind of comes off, any nice dark meat, it's going to go in my burger pile. And there really is no way, no right or perfect way to do this in terms of order of operations. It's just a matter of going around this cut of meat and doing what I'm doing here, which is meticulously removing all of the fat, keeping all of the nice trim for burger, and progressing that way. This is where it's kind of nice to just honestly put on some music and just enjoy the process. And just know that you're doing this, you're putting all this care into your meat preparation. And so when you share this with friends or neighbors or family, or even, even just for yourself, you know that you're eating a meal that you've had 100% control over. You've been the only person to harvest this animal, bring the animal home, and process it yourself. And I think that's pretty special. So this connective tissue, or this fascia tissue on the outside here, it's really thin. but I do remove it. It doesn't cook well. It tends to be rubbery, and it will actually shrink and kind of pull your meat into a weird shape. So you don't want to leave this thin membrane that's on here. Removing it is just a matter of using the tip of your knife and coming in very shallow, and it's again a meticulous process, but when you do this, you're going to have the best results. Now with all muscles, you'll see layering. Remove this cap. And what I call a cap is there's a layer of muscle right on top. And you start by removing that. You just lift up on that flap and start pulling it away. You'll see the natural separation in that seam. There's also a second seam that we're going to get to in here in just a second. And once you pull that cap back, you'll start to see it right here. And this seam, it's a very tight seam. If you work your fingers down in there, you can start to separate it a little bit. You just want to carefully use your knife to separate that. And it's okay if you do just want to cut right through there. There's nothing wrong with doing that. It's just easier for trimming when you follow those seams. Okay, so that is the main piece of meat that you'll use to cut steaks out of. So again, this can be a roast, beautiful roast. You can stuff this with garlic, black pepper, salt, some rosemary. You can tie it up, you can leave it as is, brown it, and cook that on indirect heat with a meat thermometer, and that is just a beautiful, beautiful roast. If you want to make steaks, what I typically do on the thicker end, especially on an elk, this is a pretty massive roast, so you don't need to butterfly. But butterflying is when you cut this end off. So butterflying is when you decide how thick you want your steak. You come in and you cut almost to the bottom, but you haven't cut all the way through. And then you come over that same distance and cut all the way through. And that creates a butterfly steak. And so essentially what it does is it doubles the surface area of your steak. And you'll notice there's no fat in there. This is pure, clean red meat. A little bit of trim right there. But that's how you create a butterfly steak. Now, if you want to just do small steaks, you can just simply slice those off like that. And there you go. So this is our top round. Again, this is beautiful meat. It's very lean. One thing I will tell you, since we're on the topic of steak, is if you are going to grill these, I highly recommend. I use an olive oil sprayer. I put olive oil, and the olive oil helps. It does two things. It provides moisture and also helps protect the meat from drying out too quickly. So I use olive oil when I cook wild game almost 100% of the time. So you can coat in olive oil with the light spray, salt, pepper, hot grill, or a hot cast iron skillet. A few minutes on a side. You don't want to overcook wild game because it will dry out and become tough. And that's simply because of the low fat content. All right, so now we will go over the eye of the round, which is a much smaller cut, but has a little different fascia tissue on it that I want to talk about. Really, this is not a complicated piece of meat, but it does contain a layer of tissue that is kind of different than some of that real thin tissue that I was just describing. It's kind of white, it's kind of thick, and it's kind of a pain in the neck to remove. So really what I was going to do here is just kind of show you that, because you'll run into that on occasion. And once again, here's a little fat deposit that can just be trimmed out. But back to this, what what I found is you can't really effectively flip it over and do the whole thing that I do with the silver skin. Sometimes it works, but in a case like this where I've got these jagged cuts, it's likely going to pull my knife right through it. So I tend to keep that surface up, pointed up, and just use the tip of my knife and just carefully go through it. It's kind of tough and it's kind of rubbery, and you won't get it all in one shot. You'll have to come back through and do some more trimming. But it's a weird, thicker type of tissue, but it's not silver skin. It's kind of a mix between a fat and silver skin or something. It's just kind of troublesome. So I wanted to show you that, and this is really the best way to do it, is using the tip of your knife. Again, it's kind of tough. You got to get under it, and you'll know what I'm talking about when you do this, because this stuff is not very easy to get off. But you do need to get this off. I don't care what you do with the meat. This is absolutely something that has to be trimmed off. No, it doesn't add any negative flavor, but it will make your meat chewy, and you don't want that. And then with this cut of meat, I'm using as an example of what you can do with tenderloins. On a deer, your tenderloin will be almost identical to this. It will look very similar to this, but it will be almost the exact size. On an elk, it will be about 3 times this size, if not 4 times this size. It will be quite large. Tenderloin on an elk is just fantastic. On a deer, it's a very small piece of meat, but it's good nonetheless. All right, so what you can do is cook this whole, pan fry it, brown it, and then cook it pretty quickly with a meat thermometer, and then slice up medallions. That works really well. You can butterfly it into smaller medallions, or you can simply cut them, much like I kind of call them deer scallops, because they are about the size of a large sea scallop, and they're just absolutely wonderful pan fried, much like you would a sea scallop. You can put some olive oil on here, some salt, pepper, garlic, rosemary, whatever you like. Pan fry these fast, high heat, couple minutes per side, and they are melt in your mouth. Wonderful. So that is your eye of the round. For me, it's going to go right into my burger pile. Okay, next up is our blade roast. And some people, again, will cook these whole. I prefer to just trim them out and add them to my burger pile. So the main thing to note about these is there's an outer layer of silver skin and tissue, and then there's this inner band that runs out, and then it gets really thin and tapers. And so what you want to do is, with any type of meat that's got an outer consistent layer of silver skin like this is my technique for handling that. Typically what I'll do is I'll come in and create basically a cut kind of right down to that fascia layer, right? So then I hold that, and you can use a fork. A dinner fork works really well, or if you've got stout fingernails, you can use your fingernails. Sometimes you can just also use the chunk of meat that you've left. What I do is I lay my knife flat, and you want to hold your knife at a slight angle, but not too steep of an angle, because if you're too steep, you're just going to cut through it. So you want to come down, lay your knife down flat, and then you want to slice along that silver skin. And this is what you do with back straps or any cut of meat that has that layer. And when you do that, you end up removing most of that silver skin in one simple pass. What I typically will do then is come back in the other direction remove any of this meat off of that for my burger pile. That goes in my trim. And then wherever you have these little pieces, if you're really picky, you can go and come in and just kind of pick them off with the tip of your knife, or you can leave them. In a burger grind, you will not even know those are there. They don't add any negative flavor to your meat. But I will always come in and remove these larger pieces, just because, again, this is kind of a chewy factor thing. The more tender you want your burger, if you don't want any chewy bits in there, then what goes in comes out. So if you put all this silver skin and tissue in there, yes, it will get ground up. A lot of it will cook down, but if you have bigger pieces in there, you may have some chewy pieces of meat. Now with this middle piece of tendon, you'll notice I'm not going to do this, but if I cut this in half, you'll see it. It'll be right in the middle. And the reason I'm not going to cut through it is because then I have to trim 4 pieces of meat instead of 2. 2 being this side and this side. So to kind of point out what I'm saying here, I'm going to come in, find that layer right here, and you can see it. I'm going to find that layer, and I'm going to just try to work my knife along it best I can, right out the end. And then you'll see that layer of silver skin right in the center. So this piece is essentially done. This can go right in my grind pile as is. All I would do is cube it up like that, put it in the grind pile, and it's ready to go. Now to get this off, I'm going to use that same technique. I'm going to come in, flip it over, you put the silver skin down, create yourself a little handle, and then lay your knife and let the knife just do the work along that silver skin. And it's tougher than the meat, so it will kind of guide your knife for you. And I've got most of it there. I'll come in with the tip of my knife, get a little bit more. Trimming meat is something that's, I think, subjective, in that I personally want to get as much edible meat as possible off the animals that I harvest. So I will spend the time to trim out every little bit I can. I think when you take your meat to a professional, say a butcher shop, they're working on a production schedule. So you're not going to get the same level of care and attention, nor are you going to get the maximum amount of meat back. Whereas if you do it yourself, you're in full control of this process. So once again, this is all clean, trim, ready to make burger grind, and this is the only scrap I had off of that, which was silver skin. All right, so with that, we've covered really the fundamentals of trimming game meat, and it applies to really any meat that you encounter. The front shoulders can be pretty tedious. There's a lot of real thin layering of muscles. And the best approach that I can tell you there is, don't take a giant hunk of meat and put it on your cutting board. Take your knife, cut off a manageable sized piece of meat, and do that piece, trim it out, and then get another piece, trim it out, and so on. And once you do that and get through the rest of your meat, you're going to have a tote or several totes of trimmed out meat. You'll have your burger pile. And the next point in this video is going to be when we get to that point. When we have our big tote full of cubed, trimmed meat ready for burger, I'm going to show you how to grind burger, and then I'm going to show you how to wrap your wild game meat for the best possible preservation in your freezer. Visit mywdfw.org for tips, tricks, and the latest opportunities. This WDFW website is your one-stop shop for fishing and hunting how-to information, licenses, and agency promotions, all in the spirit of getting you and yours outdoors.